has to do with detrained state. So as we've been talking about, or as we obviously, a lot of us have had this understanding, is that, a lot of these athletes are going to be coming back and returning to us after a slight detrained state or completely detrained. It is dependent on, I guess, your athlete, what they are doing on their own. That is obviously a big component of it. Some of us have more or less. Some of us have athletes that have not done anything at all. Other of us will experience athletes who have been training this entire time. Some athletes have been in facilities training. Some athletes have been at their own schools training. Some athletes have been completely non-existent, not been training at all. So there is going to be a mix and a variety and a blend there. So I think those are the biggest points for us as we're going over this, to kind of have an understanding of like the differences, but not only the differences, to kind of experience and discuss certain things as we kind of come back. We're looking at this a little bit almost as a pre-off-season training program in our phase, looking at from the volume perspective, the loads, considerations, the injuries, and then the mentality side. I think as us as strength and conditioning professionals, one of the most understated role and primary roles as we see it is the mental side of what we do. We're psychology in a way, where we're always having to discuss and get to different athletes and motivate different athletes and just kind of keep them disciplined in a way. So that's a really big component to what we're doing as well. So if anybody, again, on that regard, we're going to move on to the next part. So again, as I go through this, I do strongly encourage that we have communication back and forth and those kinds of things. So that way the topics get a little bit more interesting with a little bit more viewpoints from just somebody else rather than myself only. All right. So it is a discussion. Just keep that in mind. This is something I threw out there for Olympic considerations. I'm not sure how much Olympic programming everybody does. For us, we do it. We involve heavily in Olympics as far as our programming goes. That's kind of our base. So this is kind of what I threw out there. Some of the ways that we look at it from De La Salle's perspective is beginners, novice, and then advanced. So on this one, we're talking about, looking at it going triple extensions, pulls, hang, power catches, eliminating asymmetry and enhancing activation from the muscular the muscular side, the activation side. And then again, developing a baseline. Okay, that's kind of an important piece that a lot of us talk about. So this is again how we look at it from the beginner side. The novice side up to sophomores, we start creating skill mastery, which is increasing load while we continue to advance the skill. Zero pulls is what we call it, so that's floor pulls, and then full ROM, high load strength movement. So what I mean by that is, again, looking at the depth consideration of a squat, things like that would be what we're looking at. Our intermediate to advanced is basically going up to seniors. Not all high school athletes will always reach that advanced stage. Again, at the end of the day, we are not teaching and trying to be a professional Olympic lifter, right? So we are doing this from a high school perspective. They're athletes. We're using the Olympic side as a tool to advance them in their athletic performance or their athletic career. But again, for our focus on this one, for the intermediate up to seniors, pulling from below knees, catches, squatting catches, things like that. Now, this isn't necessarily just for the senior level or varsity level. This is at any level. It's advanced based on the athlete or the program as a whole. High intensity lifts begin, a little bit more traditional strength variables. Again, on the note here, high school level, we touch strength variables 1 to 5 only during about 2 to 3 phases all year. We spend a lot of time on power variables and hypertrophy variables during our training phases. All right. So that's kind of the concept from our perspective. Now, load considerations. Now, I bring this up because for us, we're talking about how do we return to play? How do we return to this high level from the athletic perspective? What percentages are we going to use for strength? What percentages are we going to use for Olympics? Is it a unilateral focus? Is it a tempo focus? These are things that are all considerations for us from the strength conditioning field as we return to play here. That's, again, from our side of it, that's kind of one of the important parts from that, the way I see it, and how we're incorporating to come back, okay? So I'm looking at this and going, all right, what percentages for strength? For us, when we return, we're not going to go back into the 80s, the 90s, the 100s. This is going to take us a little bit longer to get to. We're going to start back in more of the 55, 65% range. maybe up to the 70% range. For Olympics, we're going to go down to even the 45% range. We're going to go into the velocity variables, even though we might be doing technique lifts. We're still going to go down to the velocity percentages for the Olympic side, 45%, something along the lines of that, even into 55, 65% at max. So that tells us by that, it's going to dictate what we can do. We'll do hip, maybe just do some hip catches from snatch. We'll do hang movements, but all power catches, not full squat catches. We'll spend a lot of time working on pulls, whether it's a hang pull. Some of you might be familiar with what a muscle pull is. We're going to be basically kind of doing that exact same thing from the muscle pull perspective, but it's in a hang position, so that goes above knee. So those are the kinds of Olympics that we would program back in. We would not come in and go, all right, we're going to go back into clean, power clean, where we do floor-based pulls or full floor-based catches. We might pull from there, working on drive pulls at a lower percentage, but again, those percentages are going to be vital for us as we return to play. Unilateral focus. From my perspective, what we're going to be focusing a lot heavily on is the unilateral side of things. Okay, we want to basically engage that split body position, working on the asymmetrical shifts that they might have during their detrained state and they're sitting around might have been covered. Looking at the hips, how the hips are going to tighten up if they've been sitting a lot and they have been less active. We really want to create good movement patterns as well as balanced movement patterns. Okay, so that's the unilateral side. The tempo focus for us is going to be a 4 eccentric, 2 isometric, 1 concentric. That's a heavy, that's our really a commonality for us. We do tempo work a lot, especially during these kinds of phases. That's a high recommendation from my perspective on what we should be starting at, returning athletes back. Some of the examples here for us would be something like this. This is going to be a tempo goblet squat. Again, this is just a video here. So it's 4 seconds down. We're training this to the ball. So this is a squat 2. If we look at it from here, we'll be able to see that you have 4 seconds. There's a slight pause. They'll stand up. That's an easy way for us to return. Return back is kind of one of the aspects there. And another one that we might be doing is tempo dumbbell bench. It's the same concept, 4 seconds in the eccentric, 2-second pause. So 4 seconds down, pause for 2, drive up, 4 seconds down, pause for 2, drive up. This is another component. We do dumbbells a lot. So just depending on what you have at your facility, those considerations need to obviously be factored in. So those are kind of the concepts that we would be using to return. This is a commonality for us from our perspective, is doing those eccentric works and eccentric loads. So that's what I mean by tempo. So this is going to be common for us. This is going to be common for us to basically use. Okay, let me go back here. All right, so I'm going to stop share here. So with that being said, that's kind of the components more or less from our perspective of what we're looking at. We're really trying to highlight that eccentric load. We're really working at that. Again, those volume considerations are really important for us from the load side. So from here, I'd like to open it up. I'd like to have some, again, some feedback, not feedback, but maybe some considerations of how you guys are factoring and what you're going to be coming back to with your athletes. And again, they may have been training a little bit more than ours. They may have been not training at all. You might have a mixed variety. But those are just some of we're looking for more load considerations for us to kind of bounce off each other. So I'm opening it up to floor up a little bit for people to provide feedback or insight into kind of what their concepts are. Does anybody like to, I don't want to have to call on people, man. I mean, might get uncomfortable there. Anybody want to start us off here? Let's see. Joe or Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I'm Andrew One. I'm from St. Francis High School in Mountain View. Okay. So basically what we're doing, we're very limited with how many people we can have in the weight room. So we're just cutting the load in half and just kind of working from there. We have the wide variety, just like you said. We have some kids that haven't been doing anything, some kids that have been doing stuff. Just putting a big emphasis on movement quality. The kids that do have access to equipment, they've probably been doing their squats and they've probably been doing quarter squats. So we're just working on cutting the volume and just making sure the movement quality is there and slowly building up to the December 14th start date. So
okay.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, we have, and that's an important piece too. Is so I like appreciate you sharing, because again, for us as well, numbers wise, how many people are you going to be allowed back into the actual weight room? How many? That's a strong consideration. So for us, we're at 14 as well, and we're not even back yet. As we get back in with 14, we're going to have a group outside doing band work as well. So some of the auxiliary movements too. So, and it's only rack based as well on that. So that's going to be a strong consideration as well. So the size and what you have access to is a big part of value of what you're doing. But again, that's where we find the eccentric and the tempo work really helpful. It's creating those patterns, and time under tension is vital, I think, for us returning back. Anybody else like to chime in on this? Joe?
Yeah, I can chime in here. So I'm Joe Morales. I'm in Southern California. So for us, we kind of have a unique situation where we're starting outside. So a lot of the stuff, Mark, that you were talking about, we don't have barbells at the moment. It's just purely dumbbells, kind of ranging. Again, if it's potentially some of our freshmen, female athletes who might be using some of the lighter dumbbells, then they're starting at as light as 15 if need be. We have some kids that are showing up that have never played a sport before, so we're keeping the very light weights out there for those guys, and then kind of going into that medium tier up to 70 pounds. And the workout can really range on the day, including one dumbbell or two dumbbells, just depending on the nature of how many kids we have out there. So we're fortunate to kind of have some coaches that have a good pulse on their teams where they can get them to show up. Right now, it's not necessarily fully mandatory. So that's kind of a struggle we're working through. But as far as football goes, they're having just about everyone show up. So for them, their breakdown came out to basically about 30 minutes of field work, and then roughly half or so would be kind of under this tent outside, training with dumbbells, lifting weights, and then we would switch. So we're able to kind of introduce kind of three aspects as far as field work goes: acceleration on one day, emphasis, change of direction, which would be a day 2, and kind of a reconditioning aspect on a day 3, and then kind of tier it out by just your standard warm up, kind of stationary hip complex, because a lot of the stuff that these kids have been doing, I would say, is probably not as detailed as the coaches on this call. So we're really hammering home, making sure they're doing it correctly. And then the weight room aspect, they would go in and emphasize. I think, Mark, you had one exercise that had, eccentric and isometric, on one exercise. Right now we're doing really just one of those. So it would just be a 5, second eccentric, all on cadence. The whole team, or, the guys I'm working with, will be doing it all at the same time. And really that kind of coupled 2 reasons. Our coach is super, kind of not militaristic, but something along those lines, where everyone's counting the rep schemes together, kind of building a team back into it, beyond just the training part. And then the second day would kind of be the isometric. So they would go down controlled, obviously, and then they would pause for 3 seconds at the bottom, and then repeat that for however many repetitions it is. But again, that's all centered around 1 or 2 dumbbells. So it's not traditional by any means, but they're definitely building a motor at the end of the day. So we're fortunate to have that, at least. But I wish I could say we have percentages, but at the moment we're not near that yet.
Well, they're going to be primed anyways to come back in when they are able to lift. They're doing nothing right now, and they're not able to move. The most important thing is still being able to have them be able to move efficiently. So when they do get back, if you guys are able to get back in the weight room anytime soon, they can come back in and bounce back in rather quickly, rather than have to work through the whole patterns again before you can actually lift. So it's still helpful either way. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share or add that might be helpful for the group as far as what you're doing at your school regarding more like load percentages and things of that nature to start? Otherwise, I'll go back into the share. All right, so let's go back on. We're gonna go to the next topic. All right, so what we're gonna be moving on to is protocols. So volume considerations, okay? So I know obviously some of these things will blend. Obviously, when we look at volume, overall perspective, sets, reps, intensities, loads, everything like that is gonna be considered. A big factors here for us, what we talked about is time under tension, immature versus mature, and then rep protocols. Now, the reason why I break it down like this is TUT for us, TUT is really is vital and important, especially for this here, the immature muscle. We refer to immature muscle a lot of times when we're talking about youth and our training age, but we got to remember that a lot of high school athletes have not, what we would call immature muscle. So it does accept higher volumes than, let's say, a professional athlete or a collegiate athlete. Someone who's more weathered and has more mature muscle are not going to be as necessary to have such a high volume always placed on them for a long period of time. They may have a 4-week cycle with a lot of TUT, but as far as your high school athlete, they're going to accept a lot more. At least that's from our perspective and what we found to be highly successful in regarding to like load intensities and strength gains. Okay. So for us, time under tension really just talks about how long, let's think about a bodybuilder, right? How long when we're building muscle are they under stress? That's a really important part for us. I highlight this exercise here for us. It's a band Bulgarian squats because we were able to kind of get together and get some home kits out to some of the athletes so they could train on their own. Part of that aspect for us during this time or during training in general, or even if your numbers are restricted, is what do you do to increase this, to continue to actually build, even though you don't have everything that you once did as far as equipment, barbells, everything like that. So the band Bulgarian squat we found is a successful way to kind of increase our intensities or just overall like the volume loads for, again, training without having all that equipment stuff. So here's a super band. We picked it up for Perform Better. What you'll see is that I basically can increase the tension of the band and allow myself to kind of continue to increase the depth, get the top quad parallel, add some resistance, and then they would fire up. So that exercise there, what you would see is they fire up from it to the bottom. Again, it's a controlled bottom. Sometimes you get a pause there, and then you kind of just shoot up. So that's specific to that exercise, band Bulgarian, but it allows us to kind of get like 15 reps in, 12, 15 reps, somewhere around there, increases the time under tension, allows for the building. It also provides us flexibility based on space. With 14 allowed for us to go back into the weight room, there needs to be some creativity levels there as well. Even if they aren't in the weight room, we're able to actually have them continue to train and add resistance at home. Those bands like that we'll use for split squats and other things. But again, that's just one example of a consideration for us with time under tension. The unilateral side, Bulgarian squats or Bulgarian split squats are great. Obviously, probably most of us use them. But we look for that hamstring, the adductor magnus as well. We look for those things to be added in, to be engaged during that exercise. And so we understand that, with a band, we'll get a little bit more quad activation. But again, it's a great supplement. So again, time under tension is a very big thing for us right now, volume consideration. So we do pick out exercises that do have that kind of long length focus. Immature versus mature muscle. During an immature muscle for our considerations is higher volumes. We typically would not go into the strength protocols, your traditional 1s and 3s and 5s. We'll stick more into the 10s or the 12s, even the 15s. For some of the isolation exercises, we might even jump into the 18s, but everything is about a controlled movement pattern. We also might spend times where we do multiple sets at the same movement. Rather than creating and having 4 or 5 different movements, we'll spend time with one movement doing, maybe 10 sets of it. We might even put a clock to it. I think like Coach Morales was saying, is that they have cadence where they pause for 5. We'll do similar things like that with your Olympic positioning. So if we're going to do into a snatch, we want to get into the snatch variables for the mature muscle growth. They might only have a barbell, but we'll move them through positions where they're holding, so it becomes an isometric. And that helps us create more time under tension, but we'll do that a lot with that immature muscle group. So that's why for us in high school, we'll spend fewer phases in those 1 to 5s and more phases in those 6 to 10s within even our strength side. Now, Olympics, we don't go into the 6s and 10s because it's just not as effective, or what we found. So that's what I mean too when you'll see the rep protocols for us. And that rep protocol is hypertrophy over strength or velocity over power. Velocity can obviously be considered with body weight. You're talking about bounding, repetitive plyos, obviously things of that nature going down in those 45%, where hypertrophy for us, again, is going into the 65 to 80, 85%. So those are the ranges and percentages that we like to stick at and stay at more than anything else. It doesn't mean that we're always there, but that's kind of where we're at. So for us, as we go in, especially coming back, we're definitely going to spend more time. Once we get into those isometrics, the movement patterns, the eccentric loads, we'll highlight more of the velocity side and the hypertrophy side over the strength power side, especially as we continue to return back. But again, those movements are extremely vital for us to kind of engage and come back to. So that's kind of where we're at as far as our volume and our considerations for us. Does anybody have any program insights of what they might be doing when they come back in, or what they're doing currently? I know for some of us, football is going depending on your state. Some states it's paused. Some states, honestly, it may not even go. But we still have to obviously have something that we're moving towards for all sports. Doesn't matter what sport they are playing. But does anybody have any insight into kind of how they're doing their programming coming back in? Anybody want to chime in here? Let's see, I'm gonna start calling. I'm calling somebody.
Yeah.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Ed Garangelli from Justin, Siena, and we're kind of in the red to orange, so we're outside with mask. We'd be inside with, outside without the mask, inside with the mask. So we've got the varsity and JV. I've been working with the JVs, and we're doing a lot of what you were talking about, time under tension. And I'm using a lot of PVC pipe for position and movement patterns. And we concentrate on that kind of stuff. And on the older kids, we take barbells and we do a lot of landmine stuff outside. So back inside, we're doing the racks. And as far as resistance load, I'm looking more at the concept of rep in reserve. So if they're doing a set of 5 and they finish up and they say, well, I could have done 10 more, well, then you're going to increase load appropriately throughout the workout. So it's been going pretty good. We have cohorts of maybe no more than 10 kids down to 6.
Okay.
Kind of what we're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Somebody else was gonna chime in.
Could you maybe go over a little bit of the hypertrophy velocity versus strength power?
Yeah. So from a set perspective, for us, we'd be looking at like 4 sets, 5 sets, somewhere around there, 6 to 10, 8 to 12. That's where we spend most of our times in the concepts. We're looking at hypertrophy in the muscle. It's immature. So we want to create good movement patterns, slower repetitions, time under tensions. The velocity side allows us to go a little bit lighter. It keeps effective movement patterns for us as well, creating more skill mastery. When we get into a heavier load, especially with the less mature, what ends up happening is we find the movement pattern breaks down. One of our biggest things that we focus on and stress is that at the high school level, I think we're lost sometimes where people put such an emphasis on college strength conditioning. But the greatest impact I've found, and again, one might argue, but the greatest impact I've found is in high school, because we're really in charge of creating these positive, and really we're creating the base, right? We're creating that performance base for these athletes. So we want them to go into a college level in a college setting, moving better than anybody else. In our numbers, we've from historic use, when we spend more times in 6 to 10 and 8 to 12, usually 8 to 12 is a lot of our unilateral stuff. 6 to 10 is our bilateral bigger movements. So like a squat, we do 6 to 10. Even deadlifts, we'll hit 6. 8, depending on kind of what time it is, up and down controlled. Split squats, we might go to 8, anywhere from 12 to 8 reps each side. Bulgarians, 12 to 8 each side. We'll do one arm bench, 12 to 8 each side. So again, it just depends on whether it's unilateral or bilateral. But we found that our strength numbers, even without going down to those 1 to 5 with this age, significantly is increased than when we spend more time in the 1 to 5 range. I'm not saying we don't ever get to the 1 to 5 range, because we do, but it's not that often. So with the immature muscle, I found historically, just again, this is based off of just the years of doing it, that there's been greater success. Their proper muscle activation has been fired. Their size has increased, muscle hypertrophy has increased. And that's where we've seen cross sectionals increase. So we've seen the strength gains from that, rather than going into a heavier loaded movement pattern all the time, or spending a lot of time in the heavy loaded movement pattern. So when I was referring to the immature versus mature, I was talking specifically about this age. So we'll spend like, again, we might do a 5 by 8 on a squat. It will take the volume. It will obviously take the intensity down regarding how heavy they're going to go, but the volume itself will allow them to create a positive, again, and reinforce the same movement pattern, and it builds more. And that's where we found the greatest success for us in regards to strength and overall athletic development. And then when they do make it to that college realm and they do hit a lot of 1 to 5s, they're usually significantly higher than anybody on campus there, running in into the top side of it. It's also helped us increase their speed, their velocity, change of direction, things like that as well, just because we are putting more. And again, it's not necessarily that they're getting, again, bodybuilder huge, but they're developing that power ability, and that's a vital side of it, and that's come through the strength training aspect of spending more time into that hypertrophy side. Velocity side, specifically, bounding on field work, stiff leg bounding, regular bounding, repetitive jumps, things like that. Ice skaters, some unilateral work, plyos. We get creative on the plyo side. The Olympic side for the velocity work, we'll do a lot of we call hang muscle pulls. So it's basically like doing a muscle snatch or a muscle clean, if you know what the Olympic side, but we'll do it from a hang. And they basically will force them to lock out. We coach the triple constantly. So it's like quads, glutes, pull, keep the lats engaged, things like that. So we'll do a lot of velocity pulls, a lot of velocity based pulls. We'll throw chains on depending on the training age of the group, chains on with the squats, and accelerate out of the hole. So we'll do some velocity work there, but that allows us on the Olympic side to really train and dial in on the triple extension more. And that's, again, our emphasis on all Olympic movement.
So then on the velocity side, you're more concerned with the plyometric type of activities as opposed to barbell activities.
Right? Both, equally.
Both. Well, then on the barbell activity, would the concept for the velocity be more bar speed?
Correct. Bar speed, and then simplifying the movement. That's why we do a lot of we'll do a lot of hang muscle pulls. And we'll start off with that, and as they advance from there, we'll end up being able to get into maybe a 5 rep hang power clean, or a 5 rep or 4 rep hang power snatch. But a lot of times with the snatch work, when we're doing velocity, we will work from the hip. They'll just straight up sit it at the hip, and we call them a 3 power snatch, but you can call hip power snatch, however your terminology is.
Yeah, high hip.
Yeah,
high hip at the crease. Yeah, okay.
And we'll do a lot of those. We do emphasize that heavily. We might even do a 3x3 with, sometimes we'll throw a superset on there. So we'll do a 3x3 with some form of a plyo right after. And again, it depends on the phase that we're utilizing. And they'll all be real low rep counts if we do it that way. That way we don't overly fatigue them.
You do much with the drop snatch, either overhead drop or from the shoulder?
Not with normally no with the high school guys. We do in our facility, we have sometimes, or my private side, but not as much as the high school, no.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. And that's the other thing too, is if anybody has like additional thoughts or questions too, feel free to chat or chime in at any point. Okay. I'm really don't want to lecture at all. I want to kind of have this as a forum. Go ahead, Coach Morales.
Yeah. Thanks, Coach. What's your time frame that you're working with, right? Like, are you doing field work and weight room only, or like how much time? Because I'm just thinking, at least with the kids that we've had, and I would like to think we're in a pretty competitive league, but the mindset, the going back to school, like for us, we're, you know, our kids are on campus in a kind of 50% deal. So there was a learning curve of a lot, even though they've been on campus, you know, for the last potentially 3 years. So it was definitely an adjustment, even for our football guys. But, you know, I'm hearing all this and I'm, you know, putting out there, you know, I don't know how much time maybe the rest of the group has, or if other people are training with barbells, but like I said, we're not there. Is that something that you know, are going to get to maybe week 4, or, you know, the stuff you're talking about now, when you are in front of your kids, you know, when that rubber hits the road, you know, at what point are you starting that?
Well, so I look at it this way. You can't do an Olympic until you can squat jump correctly. So that's concept 1. Obviously you don't need any equipment for that. So we'll go over the basics first. They're not going to jump right back in. Now, look at velocity side, right? So you could do depth jump, you could do those drop jumps, things like that as well. You know, unilateral jumps, things of that nature as well, to kind of help. Because again, the velocity side requires you to be at a lower percentage. So if you overload a bar, you know, we're not quite going to have that same bar speed. So we're not going to do any complex lifts right away anyways, even when we do get back in. Our teams right now are only allocated 25 minutes inside the actual LAP, well, the performance center. That's it. Then they will also have a section where they'll do outside for similar time. So at that point, when they go outside, it's either auxiliary hip work, dynamic work, multiplanar work, specific isolation activation work, or they'll even do the plyometric series and things like that to add the velocity. What we'll start out with in the center with bar at most is just hang muscle pulls. They won't even catch for a while. We'll make sure that my focus is going to basically be on like tempo front squat. Like they need to be able to do a tempo front squat before I even have them go into a hang power clean. I want to make sure they can actually rack the bar correctly and have those muscles re-engaged and open again before we get to that position. Same thing, same rules apply even with the snatch side. So right now we're only going to be spending like, you know, they might come in and do a 3x5 real quick of a hang snatch muscle pull. And that's their Olympic velocity work for the phase of us going back in, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, consideration, everything's got to be considered, right? If you can't get that big of a group in, it's going to be challenging to figure out how do you accommodate time wise. We also have asked our athletes, I've programmed virtually through an app, basically for them. We've done we use Train Heroic, and we basically have it out to our athletes. And there's some requirements for them to do things, but we know that training on your own as a high school athlete, even if they do have a rack and a bar at home, is not the same. They're going to probably take 5-minute rest times, work out with their friend without their shirt off, and, you know, see how much they bench or something like that. But they're not going to necessarily be training at the same level. So those considerations kind of have to be taken in as well as your time, as well as how much, you know, access you have to a space. Did that answer? I don't know if even that answer, dude. Did that answer your question or no?
Yeah.
More or less.
Sure. Yeah.
You're like, sure. Yeah. Okay.
No, it did. And I think I jumped the gun earlier on the volume aspect, but like I said, for us, we're using really simple tools with dumbbells, 1 or 2. And they just kind of have stationary mats. So our volume, you know, for like if it's a push press, you know, is going to be 5 or below. If it's an explosive, like a high pull, you know, it's going to be in that 5 rep scheme. But everything else will simply be in kind of the 6 to 10, potentially more if it's some kind of auxiliary stuff with bands. But that's just kind of where we're at with facilities. But yeah, a lot of how we can make that up is being really efficient with our time and holding like as a team. Like if it's a plank, if it's a core series, we kind of make up for that discipline, you know, just the coaching aspect, just to make up for the lack of having a bar, basically.
Yeah, and I again, I think sometimes we can overprogram as strength and conditioning coaches. Sometimes we get too creative. We get too many things we want to do. right? And we have to come back to the basics of what's important for us, to what we find important, and what can we coach really well. And we got to just stick to that and kind of beat those into them to everyone so they understand, like, here's our principles, so they become highly effective. So yeah, I mean, I think again that's going to come down to the efficiency side. And we got another aspect I always bring up is change of direction. Everyone wants to go out and do field work and sprint and cut and do all these things, but if you don't have the quad strength, especially unilaterally, to change direction properly, to be able to absorb that impact of the sprint, the amortization phase, things like that, then, you know, it's not going to be that effective for you to even go out there and do that. You're just going to create poor movement economy as well. So, all right. So anyways, so yeah, so let's, I'm going to keep moving along here. Let's see. All right. So next topic up, injury factors. All right. So one thing to think about here for us is we consider the injury side. You know, as we're coming back, we want to make sure that we're looking at it going, all right, runner's knees, knee displacement, ankle sprains, shin splints, labrum sprains, things like that, that we always find is like high, coming back to like a lot of use. And if we're not having these athletes come back and train for this to kind of pre-prepare for it, and they get thrown back into the fire, so to speak, these are risks that could come up. So these are some of the things that we factor in or have to factor in as well. So we look at connecting the chain. One side Bulgarian is a sample exercise that we use. This is going to be a bad video, I believe. I don't remember how good this video is. So this is a one side Bulgarian for us. So it's basically open side. So leg that's back holds the weight. One of the things that we like to do is actually take the shoe off for this, kind of really connect to the floor there, use your toes to stabilize. This is a common one. I know for what we've been talking about so far is, you know, we only use dumbbells outside right now. We don't really have a lot. This is a good way for us that we found to like use that exercise effectively back to the Bulgarian squat. It reloads, it balances, but again, the connection there, the hamstring, drawing a blank, but the hamstring, the glute, adductor magnus can all get engaged with that, as well as the stability. So your glute medius is fire heavily, especially when you take those shoes off. Clams is another exercise most of us are familiar with. And then another one for us, as we look at, is the VMO, so your quad. That's a big one for us as well. Let's see if I got to go back here. Let me just exit out of this real quick. It's not letting me show that. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. It seems to, it's covering up that click link. There we go. All right. So for this one, this is another one that we like to focus on, again, with those super bands. It allows us flexibility. They can do it at home. This is called just a VMO. So it gets attached, something like this. They flex their quad out fully. Pause, isometric here for 2. Get just a quarter squat. Pause for 2. Again, we're hitting right there, getting that quad engaged and burnt, which step all the way back. Notice how the band creates tension the entire time. That one is really helpful for us. That's a great one to do when you don't have space as well. You got, let's say you're in a quad or something like that, you can attach the band to the pull. But it's very helpful for us when we talk about knee displacement, runner's knees, things like that. So it's really a prehab exercise, but it's also a great way for us to do an isometric and come back into training. So that's an important one for us to factor in. Like I said, clams, this works on our glute medius. That's another one that we like to spend a lot of time doing too. So the injury side is going to be a vital component to what we're doing as well. We have to have those considerations in. Do we in a high volume throwing sport? How do we get our retractions in? Some of the things without having a lot of things to use. When we talk about it, you go, all right, well, we obviously can do a lot of push and everything in the front anterior, but to really work on your back takes a lot more. Usually it requires equipment. So again, being creative there. So we're not everything in front, and we got to start thinking about the posterior side. So those are things that helps us out, obviously, with the labrum and things like that. So those are some injury sides for us. Again, heavily on the glute medius. We do a lot of activation work for the glute, single leg bridges, things like that. Even just engaging, we do a band bridge abduction where you bridge up and they push in and out with their with those mini bands. The band VMO squat that I showed you the video on, that's a big one that we utilize as well. That's really, honestly, really important for us. And then that gets the quad side, so that anterior load isometric. And then we do a lot of retraction holds. So we'll use those super bands, wrap them around our feet, do some cable rows, and then just to retract the scap as well for working on the up top, the labrum. And that's an important, again, an integral part for us to basically kind of build back in and thinking about the concept of these athletes could easily be injured, right? Especially coming back into the change of direction, contact, anything like that. So those are some of the things that we consider, again, the labrum, hips, through the glute medius, knee, patella injuries, meniscus, things like that. So does anybody have anything that they found common or things that they're going to be trying to address, especially in the injury side? Because I think that's an often overlooked area. And shin splints too. And let's be honest, you got heavy athletes, right? Especially for their frame. They're going to have high susceptibility if they go back in there and start doing sprints and cuts and jumping and things like that too. So they're going to have a lot of impact on their knees as it is. Does anybody have any insight into kind of what they're going to be doing to focus as far as the injury side goes?
Yeah, I do. Ed, again, Justin Sienna.
Perfect, thank you.
To do a lot of the rotator cuff complex, both standing and in like a bent over position. I call position 1, you're standing. Position 2, you're like doing a reverse fly. And I like to do the T's and the Y's on that one for the shoulder. I find that to be helpful. And then bands, I'll take bands and just have them, you know, do, I don't know what they call it, but you just do it straight out. Some call it a face pull, but I have it more down towards the chest when they do it. And again, that's working the posterior chain. And then a lot of isometric holds and single leg stance with the knee up, split squat stance, isometric split squats, and full squat isometrics. That's it.
Thank you. That's good. Anybody else want to feel free to chime in, please, on the injury side? I think, like I said, it's good for us to get ideas. Go ahead, Jay.
Sure, Mark. Yeah, you know, we're behind the 8 ball in that we are not on campus and we're not cleared to be on campus anytime soon. But in just working with Dave Perry, our football coach, we've been playing with the idea, everything that you said, working very slow and controlled. We've got to integrate high volume body weight circuits. And we want to emphasize, we're thinking rolling and crawling, because at this point, we're not allowed to use weights or any equipment on the field. But if we can get them like performing the basic crawling movements where they're loading the different joints. So we're getting a combination of range of motion, taxing those tendons and ligaments, emphasizing the quality of movement and getting conditioned. That's kind of at least our go-to solution for the immediate short term.
Anybody else have any injuries that they're focusing on?
Well, one other thing on that 2-position rotator cuff, I like to use that in combination with like bench press or a shoulder press or an incline press. So they'll do a set of bench and then they'll come back and they'll do like 15 T's and 15 Y's and kind of superset those two together, because we don't have a lot of time. So we got to, the rest interval, I don't want them just standing around talking to each other. So that keeps them busy. It seems to work pretty good. That's it.
So a big one for us, my name's Danny and I'm over at Condolet across the street from De La Salle. And a big one for us that we've been doing is using a lot of the unilateral work as injury prevention. So split squats, Bulgarians, elevated split squats, step ups, stationary step ups, things like that, just getting everything moving again. I've had the girls back since the end of August outside. We have like tons of sliding glass doors open, so we're able to bring a lot of equipment out, and then we have a full sanitization process we do. Anyway, one big thing I've seen in the last 3 to 4 weeks that we've been back to school is a lot of girls with lower back pain, way more than I saw last year. And that's going to be obviously due to a lot of the sitting and laying down they're doing at home, a lot of the inactivity they have, just with things being reduced, what they're allowed to do outside with COVID and everything going on. So doing a lot of hip work has been huge for us, a lot of glute and hamstring work, and then not trying to negate the quads at all, because a lot of them with the just sitting weird and not moving a lot, don't want to forget those. So we do a lot of quad isos there, hence the stationary step ups, but a lot of glute work, a lot of hamstring work, just trying to rebuild that. A big fear for us is with sports being reduced and just kind of now being reopening back up, is these girls are going to hit their stride and pull a hamstring right away. Things like that. So just trying to make sure we're implementing that. So doing RDLs, bridges, elevated bridges, kind of doing the same thing you're doing, Wine, is in consideration with the Olympic work, a lot of empty bars, a lot of 45 to 50%. We're an all girls school, so rarely do I get them to go 1 through 5 reps. We just hit a six rep for deadlift, but that's after about 6 weeks of training already. So I think, Joe, you were the one that was asking about a timeline of when you reintroduce Olympics and when you start doing that technique work. We did about, our prep phase is about 8 weeks if we hit it with 2 week like progressions. And we ended up doing 5 weeks of like goblet squats, split squats, elevated split squats, tempo work, accessory work. And then we're on our 6th week now, and we just introduced push press, hang snatch, muscle pulls. But we're keeping it all pretty much unloaded. We're hitting about a 6 rep there. But even there, it's pretty light for them. So I don't mind if I go into a 7 or 8 if I'm working positions and holds there. But I just know you touched on earlier wanting a timeline. Ours is about 5 to 6 weeks before we introduce the bar on those Olympic movements. It's not really answering your question, Wine, but I had to say that part.
No, it's perfect. So yeah, so again, I appreciate everybody. Does anybody else want to chime in on the injury side?
Yeah, just kind of coming back to that. Thanks, Danny, for kind of sharing your insight there. And I didn't dive into it too much because I figured your presentation was going to go into kind of deeper aspects. But I think, Danny, you even said like glute bridges, double leg glute bridges, single leg glute bridges. They're all position holded. And Mark, you talked about engaging the lats. Like those really, the thing that I can really, for those that aren't in front of kids yet, like just making sure everyone is in cadence, like they're going to skyrocket with their athleticism. So like, you know, the little things of pushing their hands in the ground, you know, they're going to engage the shoulder, you know, girdle and, you know, work on depression. And then, you know, the shoulder taps we do a lot of every day in a push-up position hold, a bear crawl. Jay, you know, you said that, and I didn't even mention that, but we'll do after the push-up position, a bear crawl position, shoulder tap. So they're working on, you know, anti-rotation at the same time. So they're, you know, engaging core as well. So definitely there's a lot that you can do with just, you know, a stopwatch, and you're telling them, you know, to complete reps and keep their technique on point. So that's the kind of the foundation of the stuff we've been doing. Again, we don't have suspension training right now, you know, for TRXs and things like that. So a lot of their pulling is going to have to be, you know, the old school, that the forearm on the leg and doing rows, kind of like that. Or like I said, with bands. So that's just where we're at. But as far as prep work, that's kind of the foundational stuff we've been kind of putting our hat on, so to speak.
Yeah, that's and again, I'm if you guys, like I said, that's extremely helpful to have details, because sometimes it is broad-based topics. So having detailed exercises, things like that is actually a very helpful thing too for everybody. All right, so I'm going to share, we're going to go into the last component, but I'm going to share something before. So, and Coach Danny brought it up, and I think this is an important part. A lot of people talk about, like, you know, and again, the lower back side is actually going to be a really thing that's big for athletes coming back. Part of it has to do with their hips. They're not rolling. You have glute activations. It's basically overall hip complex being tight and under engaged or underactive. So this exercise, the band frog bridge for us, is really a way for us to disengage, because sometimes glutes or bridges, single leg or unilateral, whatever, has lower back issues. Like they always go, oh, my back's tight, my back's tight. So this way we've been able to find that we can get a little bit more engagement on the glute and then the hamstring and take away from some of the back by putting the bottom of the feet together, and then having those knees flare out. So it's called a frog bridge. The band frog bridge is what I'm showing because we love to use these bands as well. So it helps with hip stability. But it also, again, for some of us, we might be experiencing those athletes who do have back issues or things like that. We'll superset it off of like a tempo squat, even if we don't have a dumbbell, but or a goblet squat, tempo something with goblet, and then they'll go right into a band frog bridge as a superset. So it's creating the activity and they're still going with that volume side and increasing that time under tension. So that's a specific, but Coach Danny Burnett brought it up. She brought up the lower back thing, and this is just something that popped in my head, so I popped it up real quick. But this is a commonality exercise for a variation for those athletes who do say they have lower back issues or they're tight, especially coming back. So that's a big part of it. So lastly, probably my favorite topic. This is the mental side. So there's no reason to laugh there, Coach Morales. So this side of it, this component, I think is one of the most important parts. Again, just some of the mental readiness side. Now, it can go from the psychological side to actually mentally you're prepared to actually play, right? You go into the preparation from the coach's perspective, their skills, their attributes. Again, this is where some of these things will vary. Culture loss, time to rebuild. So the fact that these athletes are so far away, I brought this up to our baseball coach who does a great job with our program in building team chemistry and building an overall program, Coach Jeans at our school. And I brought it up, he and I talked about it because it's like, at the end of the day, we've lost an entire offseason. Most of us have lost an entire preseason for that matter, right? So these freshmen, these sophomore, it's almost like you're going to have to restart when they are able to come back in. You're going to have to really consider what's important, what are your values, what are your musts for your programs, right? So for strength and conditioning, it's no different. They might have lost over this last 4, 5, 6 months. What does it mean to basically train within your space or train with you or train as, the performance side? So the culture side is really an important piece. What does that mean? Do you need to even get to the point where we kind of revisit those variable or the do's, the don'ts? And again, that's coach dependent. So that's the topic that we'll kind of discuss here lastly. Closed versus open. It's so easy to do closed drills. And I don't mean it's easy to actually do them successfully, but I mean it's easy because throw some cones out, we create variety, right? And then you're hitting those drills where they know they're A, B, C, and where they're stopping. But the reality is that creates great movement patterns. It's an easy place for us to coach it and technique it. But sports are open, right? Sports are open and reactive. So we have to have those factors and those variables in those considerations. If we stay closed format and they move to open format, never experience those specifics, then they're also putting themselves at injury risk. The other thing of the open format is obviously sport, right? You put them in their sport, and most of the time that's the best way to train for their sport. But we can actually better prepare them as strength conditioning professionals as well to kind of get them into this quickness based on reaction, right? So the reaction side. The emotions, right? This is a big thing for me. I always talk about this. Motivation is an emotion. It comes and goes. Discipline lasts. So is it discipline that we're looking at? That are we lacking now? Look at our athletes. Some of our athletes have been at home. They've been prescribed things, but they're not doing them. So they're lacking discipline. And everything comes back to, I'm not motivated. What am I motivated? Motivation is an emotion, straight up. It's an emotion. It comes and goes. It's great. You definitely want to have it, but the only thing they're going to be able to really fall back on is discipline. We cannot impose discipline because we're not around them all the time. Like Coach Morales brought up, is that they're not all mandated. It's not mandatory for them to be there. So if it was, that's imposed discipline, right? We need self-discipline. So teaching our kids self-discipline is going to create more success for them, especially in the long run. So the emotional side. Other things and considerations, especially this day and age, is, again, I put weakness, softness, entitlement. Entitlement is a real thing, and is it a factor? It doesn't mean that I'm not bad mouthing everybody. It's just a factor. Sometimes they think that no matter what I show up, I deserve this. Well, no, there's actually a point where you have to work towards something. There's a challenge. Life is hard. So things like that. And I think these are all great times, especially with what's going on. I believe that this is a fantastic time for us to kind of reinforce some of these things and drive these points home for us as we continue to move forward, especially in this career. So my concept, and the reason why I wanted to bring this up, was because as we are having these people return, our athletes return, this is a big side of it on how we're being successful when they return. Is, again, is that emotional side, the mental side, the training side. So for us, a simple drill, we'll go into change direction. We'll put them in a closed format. So specific to that side, we put them in a closed format drill, lateral hop to sprint. So they would literally start on the right, they'll jump to their left, and then they'll accelerate 5 yards. It allows us to give them a simple, basic change of direction, and the mechanical drive is there. We'll advance that drill to something where they're competing against their friends. Maybe it's just a quick shuttle, 3-3 and gone, 3-3-5 and you're out. Okay, and then we would move to a mirror drill or some form of reactionary drill with a tennis ball. So they have to kind of react to the ball, they accelerate. We play a game called fetch. I have the athletes play fetch, where basically they're facing forward, the ball, they throw a ball up in the air, it drops. Where it drops, they got to accelerate to go get it. You can do that with a group, with teammates, things like that. So those are other aspects and components of skill-based that we would work on. The discipline side, one of the things that we've tried to reinforce this entire time is send little things for them to do, where it's like, hey, you need to do this every day and submit something. So they understand, like, okay, this is something I'm going to do every day. We challenge them. You pick it. What are you not good at? Okay, I need to work on my mobility. Okay, great. You're going to do 15 minutes of mobility every day. Start out in the morning or at night to instill self-discipline. And then the motivation side, what are they playing for? One of the things that we've talked about a lot is there even going to be a season, right? In some states, there may not be. In other states, there are definitely going to be. So finding motivation for these kids so they have that initial buy-in is a valuable factor. And then lastly, reinforcing what is valuable to us as strength conditioning. What do we want these kids to know? The work ethic side. We're disciplinarians to a degree, right? Like, these are the kinds of things and components that we have to have the value and the factor. And the thing that we've experienced personally has been that, like the moping, right, of athletes that are just kind of like, yeah, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Like, and they've lacked that. So that goes into that toughness side of being resilient to be able to kind of get through anything. And that goes into messaging, talking to them, having a conversation, not being afraid to yell when it's necessary. So there's those kinds of variables that always have to be factored in. I brought this up because I think this is kind of honestly an easy way to end, but it's also a really important thing for us to kind of factor in, where we often neglect it. So I'm curious if anybody has anything that they're, even if it's something they've experienced recently with an athlete, or more or less, what are some of the values or the factors that you're going to basically bring back in, or what you find valuable to teach your kids at this time? If anybody has anything they want to add on that. Don't feel like you have to chime in, but if you do.
Yeah, I'll chime in.
All right.
And the reason why I was laughing is because you and I have talked a lot about the soft generation. It was nothing on that, but I knew that was going to come up at some point. Generation soft. So I think I kind of sprinkled it in there, but just if California does play or however it goes, they have to have some experience by nature of kind of relying on something that was challenging, right? So did they do something competitive that day? Like you said, Coach, they're doing I can't remember what you called it exactly, but they're kind of racing against one another, doing something competitive, fun, but still challenging at the same time. So I really do believe it's a real thing. And like you said, you don't have to, at times you have to raise your voice. And I think kids, for lack of a better word, maybe have been at grandma's house, so to speak, the last few months, where they are working out, but it's not by any means, being able to play 4 quarters if it's a girls' basketball game, or 4 quarters if it's a football game, together, all 40 guys all at the same time. So I think they have to be able to to hear you and connect with you and resonate with you, but they also have to have times of oh gosh, what's the other one? Of feeling. That's what I was trying to say, of feeling, right? So like that commanding presence, if they can hear you, right, when they feel you, so to speak, obviously from 6 feet because of COVID, but like you have that booming voice of like, we're not here to mess around. And if you are, then I'm going to be on your case. And it's because I love you, right? Like whether, whoever it is, right? Any kid that we have at our school. So I think it's a very real thing that you have to implement, just for the, if nothing else, it's the safety of the kids. Like if you want them to go and really tell your coach, you know, you prepared them, you know, for competition, then you better believe that, right? Like they're training in an atmosphere that's going to keep them safe. Like the tendons and the ligaments, Jay, you talked about different things that they're going to have to rely on, whether they know it or not, guys and girls. So yeah, I definitely believe that that's at the centerfold for sure. Just the nature of how they're working and the tempo with which they're working with, for sure.
I think even virtually, you got to set up, even if you set up, you know, Zoom calls with leadership groups, I think it's helpful. We did that. I did that for our football program early on as they got through. Then once the football program kind of took over a little bit and they started really getting heavy into a lot of their Zoom calls with specific to the sport, we stopped doing it because we just wanted to make sure that there's still like that ability to see face. That was an important part for us. Have conversations, still kind of go about our business like if nothing was different. So there's an understanding of like, you know, what's changed, nothing's changed. You still have the same goal, so you still need to be working towards that same goal. That's kind of an important piece for us to kind of drive home constantly, because I think that's some of the things like, well, all this stuff has changed. Well, not really. If you still have the same vision of yourself and where you want to be, it's still the same. Nothing's changed. So I think that's a message that we try to strive and, or really, I personally try to push to a lot of the athletes that I spoke with at all. And that was a big part of it. Let's see. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add on that topic?
Yeah, just I guess loosely related. I don't want to take up the mic here, but there's a book that I'm probably going to buy right after this call. I don't know if you've heard of it, Mark. It's called "It Takes What It Takes" by Trevor Moawad. I don't know if you've heard of that, but he's worked a lot with the Seattle Seahawks, Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. And UCLA obviously is just around the corner from us, and their basketball team has been kind of highlighting it. So hopefully I can have more information on what that could mean for the soft generation, and how they could learn some things from this guy. But he's a sports psychologist, you know, kind of implementing stuff very practically. So hopefully I can have more for you later.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the book side is an important thing too, where you get your messages from, and it gives you insight into kind of that aspect of it, the mental side. And I think again, that can't be under stressed at all. It is so important as far as, especially nowadays, to figure out that mentality side is vital. And it goes as much as a skill base as it is a discipline base. So I think it's really important. Well, I appreciate everybody getting on the call today. You know, it was for us with the CNAA, it was really trying to get everybody to connect a little bit, and really have an open discussion and figure out, you know, obviously a direction, but have a discussion still nonetheless, so we can all learn from each other and kind of get a better idea of some of the things that some of us are facing. We're not all in the same situation. Some of us are in similar situations. Some of us are in completely opposites. But either way, it's really just about us trying to benefit our athletes, and make sure that we do the best job that we can do and continue to learn, especially in this profession that's always changing. So I appreciate everybody taking the time today. We'll definitely look forward to, as part of the organization, is getting more out here, and hopefully we can get these things bigger and get more conversations and topics down the line. We will be trying to do these about once a month and have various topics. This topic was just obviously about return to play, but the topics in the future will obviously change. We'll get into some more specifics as well at the future dates. So again, I appreciate everybody. Thanks for taking the time this morning. I hope everybody has a great day for the rest of your day. See you guys later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Coach.